welcome to this explainer. Documentation isn't just paperwork. It is literally your system's central nervous system. Today, we're diving deep into ISO 14001:2026 Clause 7.5, and we're going to transform what you might think of as a boring bureaucratic chore into a high-stakes narrative about the true operational heartbeat of your environmental management system.
Okay, let's kick things off by asking a pretty tough question. It's one that every lead auditor has in the back of their mind. When things go wrong, do you actually have the verifiable proof to back up your environmental commitments? Because, let's be honest, it's one thing to say your organization cares about the environment. It is entirely another to pull up the exact controlled procedure that was followed on the factory floor during a sudden chemical spill, or to present the precise monitoring logs recorded during a Tuesday at 3 a.m. emissions anomaly.
I love this thought right here because it perfectly captures the core philosophy of Clause 7.5. It's a great reminder that an environmental policy without controlled documentation is, well, it's really just an empty promise. You can't just rely on a theoretical framework made up of good intentions and vague guidelines. You need a functioning, verifiable system. The planning gives you a roadmap, sure, but the proving, through meticulous, unassailable records, that is what actually demonstrates you traveled the path.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the core of EMS integrity, identification and formatting, review and approval, document lifecycle control, and finally, avoiding audit pitfalls.
All right, diving right into Section 1, the core of EMS integrity, planning versus proving.
So there's this super clear, non-negotiable distinction in ISO 14001 between required documentation and retained evidence records. Required documentation, that's your organizational intent, your policies, your procedures, your risk evaluations. It dictates exactly how your team should handle hazardous waste, for example. Retained evidence records, on the other hand, are the actual logs, the monitoring results, and calibration certificates proving they did it correctly. Picture a common audit finding. A company has a beautifully written procedure for wastewater testing, but they absolutely cannot produce the calibration logs for their pH meters. They've got the intent, but zero proof of execution. You absolutely need both.
Moving on to Section 2, Identification and Formatting Essentials, the birth of a document.
So, how does a document actually start? Well, you don't just document everything in sight. You identify exactly what needs to be controlled based on the complexity of your operations. Assessing your environmental risks directly dictates your level of detail. For example, if you're dealing with a minor impact, like, say, general office paper waste, a simple one-page segregation guide is totally fine. But if you're running a chemical manufacturing plant, the severity of that risk demands intricate handling procedures, highly detailed emergency responses, and meticulous daily monitoring schedules. The scale of your documentation always has to match the risk.
Now, here is a secret straight from the auditor's playbook. Formatting is absolutely not about making things look pretty. It's actually a vital safety control focused entirely on crisis usability. A massive block of complex jargon with no version control is literally worse than useless during an active emergency spill. It actively makes things worse by confusing the responders. ISO-compliant formatting means structured, step-by-step instructions, clear visual aids, and highly traceable identifiers like revision dates and document numbers. If an operator in a high-stress situation can't easily read and execute those instructions, well, your environmental controls have fundamentally failed.
Okay, Section 3, Review Cycles and Approval Records, which we call the validation phase.
Review cycles are definitely not just rubber stamps. Let's say in month 6 you introduce a new operational reality, like installing a brand new bank of electric vehicle charging stations. Your documented aspects and procedures must immediately evolve to reflect that new localized risk. And actually, updating the procedure isn't even the end of the line. That update has to trigger a mandatory review of all associated training records to make sure the maintenance staff actually knows how to handle this new infrastructure. Technologies upgrade, regulatory requirements change, and if you aren't rigorously reviewing your docs against these shifting realities, your system is flying completely blind.
Here's a hard truth you definitely need to remember. Without a formal approval signature from competent personnel, your procedure, it's really just a suggestion. If the lead auditor finds an unauthorized procedure in use, it completely undermines the accountability of your entire system. And competent personnel doesn't mean grabbing any random administrator to sign off. It means securing approval from a designated leader with actual technical understanding over that specific environmental aspect. When a process changes, that new documentation must be reapproved by that authority, otherwise you're essentially running a rogue operation.
That brings us to Section 4, Controlling the Document Lifecycle, the Governance Phase.
Think of these controls as your organization's digital vault. ISO 14001:2026 demands that you control a document's entire lifecycle, which honestly creates this really delicate balancing act between tight security and absolute accessibility. You have to protect sensitive environmental data from unauthorized tweaks, which means implementing strict role-based edit access. But at the exact same time, the night shift operator on the floor needs instant read-only access to the absolute latest spill response protocol without needing to hunt down a manager's password. Security and accessibility have to exist in perfect harmony.
So what's an obsolete document? Well, having one of these floating around your facility is honestly one of the fastest ways to fail an audit. Imagine a waste disposal procedure that was painstakingly updated to meet new environmental laws, right? But the old, non-compliant version is still pinned to the break room bulletin board. If an employee follows that old paper, boom, you've just committed a tangible compliance violation. Now, ISO 14001 does let you retain obsolete docs for legal or knowledge preservation, but they absolutely must be explicitly marked as obsolete and segregated from active use.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, avoiding common audit pitfalls, looking right through the auditor's lens.
Administrative failures in document control aren't just minor paperwork oopsies. They directly translate into physical, real-world environmental vulnerabilities. Uncontrolled duplication, like printing out a dozen copies of a manual and stashing them in different desks, virtually guarantees someone is going to follow an obsolete instruction. Missing approvals. That signals a complete lack of organizational accountability and keeping outdated aspects. Well, tying back to our earlier example, if you install those EV charging stations but never update your aspect register, you are completely ignoring a brand new operational impact. Weak document control is always a huge red flag for deeper operational failures.
100. That's a big number, right? Well, 100% is the exact percentage of your environmental objectives that rely on the absolute integrity of your documented information to be verifiable, auditable, and truly effective. You simply cannot claim a 15% reduction in energy usage or boast a zero-spill safety record to your stakeholders without the highly structured, securely retained data to back it up. Documentation is literally the only bridge between the claims you make and the reality you can prove.
Ultimately, mastering Clause 7.5 shifts this whole document control thing from a frustrating bureaucratic hurdle into the actual foundation of your organization's resilience. When you thoughtfully create procedures matched to real risk, format them for crisis usability, continuously update them through proper reviews, and tightly control their life cycle, you build an impenetrable system. Your team operates with total confidence, and you go from merely surviving your annual audits to actively driving sustainable, verifiable environmental performance. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a critical question to chew on. What would an auditor find if they walked onto your floor right now? Is your documented information a living reflection of your reality or just a binder collecting dust? Go check your shared drives, look at the revision dates on your shop floor procedures, and ensure your intent strictly matches your proof. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into ISO 14001. Keep your records clear, keep those versions controlled, and keep your environment protected.